Welcome back, committee members. We will now consider the estimates for the Ministry of Environment, and we will begin with vote 26, Environment, Central Management and Services, subvote EN01. Minister Scorpad is here with his officials, and I would ask that officials please state their name and titles each the first time they speak to the mic, and if you just raise your hands, Hansard will be following along and turn the mics on for you. So, Minister, you can begin by introducing the officials that have joined here this evening and any opening remarks you have.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members of the Standing Committee for the Economy. I'm pleased to be with you here today to present some of the important initiatives that are supported by the 2023-24 Ministry of Environment estimates. Here with me this evening are some members of our team. In no particular order, Kenneth Cotterill, my Chief of Staff, Veronica Gelowitz, Deputy Minister, Assistant Deputy Ministers, Kevin Murphy, Wes Kodak, and Rebecca Gibbons. Seated on my left is Aaron Worth, Executive Director of Climate Resilience Branch. And at the back, we have Nick Gann, Director of Budget and Reporting Branch. The Ministry of Environment's budget will increase to $95.3 million, or by 2.9% in 23-24. This will help support investments in the ministry's mandate of environmental protection, sustainable resource management, and continue to make the province more resilient to the impacts of climate change. This includes almost $5 million for climate resilience to continue the important initiatives currently underway. As a ministry, we have wound down our small modular reactor program. Our SMR unit completed and met its objectives, which included the SMR feasibility study, strategic plan, and supply chain and business case. The program has now been transferred to the Crown Investments Corporation, where they will continue their work on energy security. However, the Ministry of Environment will be still responsible for environmental protection and policy for this ongoing work. In our pursuit of sustainable development, we recognize that striking a balance between economic growth and environmental protection, conservation, and biodiversity is crucial. We've committed more than $17 million for fish and wildlife populations and management of Crown resource lands, an overall increase of 9.2%. This includes funding to support the province's critical mineral strategy through opportunities to improve the permitting process. As we strive to support industry's important work, such as sustainable mineral exploration, we also remain vigilant in our efforts to conserve and protect the diverse species that inhabit our province. This budget includes $1.8 million to support species at risk, including $250,000 for conservation actions in the south of the Divide and greater sage-grouse critical habitat. This project will further implement a made-in-Saskatchewan multi-species approach to managing threatened species. We're also allocating $4.8 million to continue to support the Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, which will help us better manage and conserve our wildlife, fisheries, and habitat resources. The fund is a key component to protecting and enhancing Saskatchewan's wildlife and landscapes. It is a continued focus on the protection of vulnerable fish and wildlife habitats, the promotion of resource education, and endangered species programming that supports the sustainability of our province's vast and biologically diverse landscapes and wildlife populations. Additionally, beginning September 1 of this year, we are introducing a new wolf hunting license as an add-on to the non-resident outfitter big game hunting license. This new license reflects our commitment to balancing economic growth with environmental conservation. It will provide Saskatchewan outfitters with additional opportunities to support their businesses while implementing a sustainable and responsible approach to wildlife management. Ministry staff have been working collaboratively with Saskatchewan Trappers Association and Saskatchewan Commission of Professional Outfitters on the development of this hunting opportunity. I would now like to take the opportunity to highlight some of our major accomplishments over this past year. We continued work on the remediation of non-uranium abandoned mines, which is a significant environmental and public health concern. In collaboration with industry, Indigenous communities, and other stakeholders, we are developing comprehensive plans for the remediation of these sites. Our mine remediation strategy includes conducting thorough site assessments to determine the extent of contamination and environmental risks, developing tailored remediation plans to address specific site conditions, and engaging with local communities and stakeholders to ensure their concerns are addressed. Furthermore, our strategy involves monitoring and maintaining remediated sites to ensure their long-term safety, stability, as well as promoting sustainable land use and economic development opportunities. The province is currently addressing the 6 highest risk sites, including Nucor near Creighton, Western Nuclear on Hanson Lake, Vista near Creighton, Anglo Ruin north of Larange, Rotten Stone on Rotten Stone Lake north of Mississippi, and Box Mine located near Uranium City. Last year, we were pleased to be able to complete remediation work on the Nucor mine. The final remediation plans and execution for the remaining sites are expected to be completed in the coming years. This work helps fulfill our commitment to clean up abandoned mines in northern Saskatchewan so they will no longer pose risks to the public and environment and will no longer be publicly reported as environmental liabilities. In February of this year, we had the first successful application for the Impacted Sites Fund. Through this fund, municipalities can apply for funding to clean up orphaned, environmentally impacted sites. These are abandoned sites where there is no financially viable responsible party remaining. Recently, the town of Shaunavon received just shy of $37,000, which will help them determine the extent and magnitude of the impacts. Our solid waste management strategy was introduced in 2020. Each year, the strategy's annual report is released, outlining the progress we have made on the goals that guide our Saskatchewan's vision for waste management. Supporting and encouraging people to reduce, reuse, recycle, and composting is key. I'd like to recognize Sarcan for their continued work supporting waste reduction in this province. Earlier this year, they reached a tremendous milestone, processing their 10 billionth beverage container. In Saskatchewan, we have one of the most robust suites of recycling programs in the country. We continue to implement our solid waste management strategy, recognizing the critical role waste management plays in protecting the environment and public health. It is a strategy that protects the environment and promotes economic development and innovation. It also recognizes that we all have a significant role to play in reducing the amount of solid waste we send to the landfills for the health of our people and certainly for the health of our province. The Ministry endeavours to support communities to meet the challenge of solid waste management. Following stakeholder feedback, we recently added a chapter to the Environmental Code related to transfer stations, which are low-cost and convenient alternatives to landfills. This code streamlines the permitting and reporting process and provides flexibility to help transfer station owners achieve environmental compliance. We also expect that these changes will reduce the cost to municipalities. In the coming weeks, the Ministry will be launching engagement on a code chapter for compost facilities. Like the transfer station code, we expect this change to streamline the siting, design, and operation process for municipal compost facilities. Inert landfills are another important tool in the waste reduction kit. Inert materials can also be referred to as construction or demolition waste. Not only do inert landfills help divert solid waste from industrial or municipal landfills, but they are less costly to construct and to operate. To help municipalities complete the approval process for designing and operating an inert waste landfill, the Ministry developed and published the Inert Landfill Design and Operational Guidance document in July of this past year. This supports communities to better meet their local challenges of waste management. We have heard that this document was certainly well received by stakeholders who requested it. We will continue our efforts to promote environmental stewardship in the province. It is essential that we recognize the importance of climate resilience in ensuring the long-term health and sustainability of our ecosystems and natural resources. Each year, we release an annual resilience report on prairie resilience, our main Saskatchewan climate change strategy. This is to demonstrate our continued commitment to build resilience to climate change in our province. The 2022 Resilience Report shows sustained positive trends and improvements from the previous year in all resilience measures. Of the 22 measures reported this year, 18 measures are in good standing and no measures are in poor standing. The introduction of our Output-Based Performance Standard Program, or OBPS program, exemplifies our commitment to enhancing climate resilience while fostering a thriving economy. This Made in Saskatchewan industrial emissions pricing system aligns with our Prairie Resilience Climate Change Plan, encouraging industries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve emissions intensity, and adopt more sustainable practices. By collaborating with stakeholders across government and industry, we have developed a robust and adaptable framework that supports both environmental protection and economic development. By expanding the system to include additional sectors, we are further diversifying our efforts to reduce emissions and promote more sustainable practices across industries. This Made in Saskatchewan carbon pricing program will save Saskatchewan industries and the jobs and the families they support an estimated $3.7 billion compared to the federal backstop between now and 2030. Our Saskatchewan OBPS program also features the Saskatchewan Technology Fund, which will direct funds to support industry efforts to reduce emissions intensity through use of technological innovation. We look forward to seeing how the projects advanced through the fund will benefit our province for years to come. Forestry is Northern Saskatchewan's largest sector and the backbone of our northern economy. The northern forestry sector supports families and communities with nearly 8,000 jobs and hundreds of businesses. It is a sector that has seen significant recent investment and stands to bring even more opportunity to our province's north, opportunity that aligns with our growth plan goal of doubling our forestry sector by 2030. With this in mind, we have committed $400,000 to continue accelerating the Forest Resource Inventory project. This project will allow the ministry to better estimate timber volumes and susceptibility to natural disturbances and better support sustainable investment in this important sector. Our government welcomes sustainable developments and works with industry to ensure that our forests continue to be well managed, healthy, and sustained over the long term. Saskatchewan's forests continue to contribute to climate change mitigation and resilience through sustainable harvest practices and management of fire, insects, and disease. In May of this past year, we approved the 20-year forest management plan for the island forests, which covers more than 226,000 hectares of Crown Forest land in the north central Saskatchewan in the Prince Albert area. This land includes the Nisbet, Fort Delacorne, Canwood, and Torch River provincial forests. Because they are so close to many communities, these forests are highly accessed for many purposes. Most forest management plans take several years to complete and are typically developed by forestry companies with long-term licenses for the area. This area is without a licensee, but the Ministry of Environment, recognizing the value in having a strategic plan for the area, undertook the responsibility for the development of a forest management plan. This involved public engagement and consultation with First Nation and Métis communities, and an independent evaluation assessed the plan strategies and process. The plan took more than 10 years to complete and is the first forest management plan developed by the ministry. We are pleased to see this work completed and that a plan to ensure the forest's long-term health and sustainability is now in place. A final highlight is that through targeted monitoring, we have seen a significant decline regarding the threat of mountain pine beetles. An infestation of mountain pine beetles would potentially be devastating to our forests and forest-dependent communities, so early detection and prevention is certainly key. We are pleased that the ongoing surveillance in the Boreal Northwest and Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park is keeping our forests safe from this potentially destructive insect. As a whole, the ministry recognizes the importance of public, stakeholder, and Indigenous engagement in ensuring that our policies, programs, and services are supported and informed by the citizens that we serve. To enhance this work, we established the ministry's Indigenous Engagement Fund This fund supports meaningful participation in engagement initiatives with First Nation and Métis communities and organizations. A good example of this work is the work happening around the woodland caribou range planning. Throughout this last fiscal year, the ministry undertook extensive engagement with industry, First Nation, and Métis communities to understand the various perspectives and concerns regarding woodland caribou range planning. In-person meetings were held in Prince Albert, La Ronge, Black Lake, and Hatchet Lake. Throughout these sessions, rights holders and stakeholders were provided opportunities to participate in developing and implementing the range plans. Plans that have helped us develop a more comprehensive and effective approach to mitigating potential impacts on woodland caribou and their habitat while respecting the rights and interests of stakeholders. These consultations and the relationships they fostered remain critical to ministry planning and support our growth plan objectives while maintaining an ecological balance. Our ministry's Fish and Wildlife branch also undertook significant engagement this year by working closely with the Saskatchewan Aboriginal land technicians and the Métis Nation Saskatchewan. Through this work, the ministry has ensured that their valuable input on habitat management planning and chronic wasting disease is taken into account. This collaboration strengthens our collective efforts to address these crucial issues, resulting in more effective and sustainable management practices and strategies. As we continue to forge collaborative relationships and seek meaningful engagement with stakeholders, our focus remains on fostering a resilient and prosperous future for Saskatchewan, where environmental stewardship and economic growth certainly go hand in hand. As the world evolves around us, so too do the needs of our customers and stakeholders. We are continuing to work on the public inquiry project to modernize our customer service platform and customer management database. We have allocated $2.8 million in IT capital funding to drive this project forward. As we move forward, we continue to prioritize the health and resilience of Saskatchewan's precious resources. The work we have presented here today is only the beginning, and we believe these measures will help us achieve our goals and create a better future for all citizens of Saskatchewan. It is through our combined efforts that we can create a thriving Saskatchewan where environmental stewardship and economic growth are mutually reinforcing. Together we can foster a bright and prosperous future for our province and for generations to come. And with that, I would like to thank the Committee of Economy for your attention and support, and I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'll now open the floor to questions from committee members, and I'll recognize Ms. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, and to all your officials here tonight and who've done so much work leading up to tonight. And I'm sure there's many watching at home as well who've worked so hard over the past year. Minister, you mentioned in your introductory comments funding for to support the critical mineral strategy. What was the value of that funding?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, so there's $300,000 that's budgeted to perform a review of the process of the permitting process for exploration. We conducted an internal review already and found some efficiencies and some improvements we can make internally, but we're endeavoring to have an external review done, and so that's $300,000 for that, and then another $200,000 additionally for 2 FTEs to support that branch's work.
Thank you, Minister. You also mentioned in your introductory comments some of the work that your ministry's done on the SMR file, and forgive me, I believe you mentioned was work on both a feasibility and a business plan. Am I right in having heard that?
Yeah, no, you're spot on with that. It was for a feasibility and a business case model. And so with that being wound down, that was rolled into the CIC.
That was wound down in this most recent fiscal year.
Yes.
Thank you. Are either the feasibility business, when will the feasibility and business plans be made public?
Hi. Aaron Worth, the Executive Director of the Climate Resilience Branch. Thanks very much for the question. So the feasibility report was actually produced about a couple years ago, and it was produced in association with all of the energy and environment ministry departments within Ontario, Saskatchewan, and New Brunswick. With the power companies in those jurisdictions. So that was released publicly. We supported them, but it was really led by the power companies. It explained in detail the economic and technical feasibility of SMRs. To your other part of your question about the business case report, that was work that was commissioned by the Ministry of Environment. We had worked with a consulting firm called Hatch Consulting on that, and the purpose of that report was essentially just to understand the economic benefits of small modular reactors beyond grid scale, small modular reactors for electricity production. So whereas SaskPower was really focused on grid scale, reducing emissions, providing safe, affordable, reliable power, our report was really focused on all the economic benefits in terms of generation for small modular reactors that would provide heat and steam. Maybe they could support hydrogen production, research, medical isotopes, and things of that nature. So it was a little bit different than what SaskPower was doing. And we completed that report, but really Crown Investments Corporation is really now responsible for that file. There's an energy security unit within that organization that really now has the study under their purview, and I understand that there's an executive summary that can be made public as part of that study, and Crown Investments Corporation is looking to do just that, to share that with stakeholders, proponents of SMRs, and others. So those are sort of the various reports that the SMR unit worked on. But again, the Crown Investments Corporation is really responsible for disseminating the work around that Hatch business case analysis.
That document then lies with Crown Investments Corporation?
Yes, and there is an executive summary that I understand Crown Investments Corporation has been making it public to stakeholders. It's a public-facing document, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And with the transition of those responsibilities over to CIC, has there been any movement of FTEs accompanying that?
Aaron Worth, Executive Director of the Climate Resilience Branch. Thank you for the question. So yes, so because there was a 3-year mandate for the Small Modular Reactor Secretariat or unit within the Climate Resilience Branch of the Ministry of Environment, it had completed its work within 2 years or just over 2 years, and so it was wound down. So as part of that mandate, those positions that work was complete, and so those positions were wound down. They were temporary in nature. And then Crown Investments Corporation, because it established a new energy security unit, it saw a need to have some capacity around small modular reactors on behalf of the Crown sector and with respect to executive government. So, they staffed up. They hired a nuclear physicist that that happened to be the nuclear physicist that was working within the SMR unit. So he took a position there before the completion of the wind down. Another individual had went to SAS Power, working on some of the engagement there related to small modular reactors as well in that Crown Corporation. And then all of the other positions were vacated through attrition, folks stepping down those positions or finding other roles elsewhere before the actual wind down was completed.
Thank you very much for that. Like to move on to a handful of questions about the OBPS. And I guess maybe just starting to try and get a better understanding of where things are at in a baseline for this. How many industry dollars so far have been captured by this?
So just clarity on that. So are you referring to since the inception of OBPS? Okay. Yeah. We're just trying to get you an exact number on that one. It'll just be a second here. Yeah, thanks again for that question. So the total that we've taken in for compliance payments to date, and these would be for the years 2019, 2020. Those are the years that would be accounted for here, and it is $29,270,017.70.
A remarkably accurate number. Thank you, Minister and officials. And just so I'm comparing apples to apples. When you reference the years, is that fiscal or calendar?
Yeah, that would be calendar years.
And since January 1, do you have that total as well? Yeah.
Thanks for the question. So the 2019 and 20 compliance years are the ones that we've collected payments for. The reason that there's a lag is honestly because of the COVID pandemic. So we had a number of companies that had to close their facilities because folks had contracted COVID. There was supply chain disruptions. There was some challenges, so we provided some leniency to our regulated mayors to give them a little bit of extra time to start up their operations. We were also rebaselining a number of companies as well at the time because of just large shifts in production because of COVID-19. that's how the program works. We essentially set these baselines for companies that then they are compared against in terms of their emissions intensity. And so we are seeing significant changes in the economy because of COVID and in the market. So we really needed to take a step back and say these baselines that we're judging our companies against in terms of their emissions reduction requirements are no longer representative. And so we spent a fair bit of time working with a number of companies to find a more representative baseline. The federal government actually did the exact same thing. They provided the same type of leniency. They extended their program and the compliance obligations that were owed under the federal output-based pricing system. So that's why we see a little bit of a delay, and that's why we've only just recently started collecting the 1920 compliance. We are moving forward, going to try to kind of close that gap. So it's a little bit, the compliance year after those emissions are emitted and compliance is calculated. We're trying to move that to about a 1-year process. So we can provide more regulatory certainty for our regulated emitters, and so we can collect those compliance obligations as soon as we can. So we will see 2021 compliance due at the end of December of this year. And then it'll be a 1-year process from that point forward. Now, with regard to the new federal benchmarks starting in January 1st, 2023, retroactive, we're still working to stand up our regulations, and the federal government will be working to stand down the regulations. So we don't have regulatory authority just yet. But presuming that they transfer that regulatory authority for Sask Power, Sask Energy, electricity emissions facilities, and natural gas transmission pipelines to Saskatchewan, and that's retroactive Jan 1, 2023. Those compliance payments, which there's a lot of interest in terms of Saskatchewan getting control over at least those compliance payments staying in Saskatchewan, won't actually be due until December 31st of 2025, so not until almost 2026. So we're looking forward to, job number 1 is focused on just getting control. We're in the process of finalizing our regulations, which are required by the federal government to review those regulations, to accept those regulations. They've already accepted our proposal, but they need to look at the regulations and then all the standards that come with those regulations. And once they've done that, then they can start the process this summer of standing down their regulations. And once that happens, we can register electricity facilities and natural gas transmission pipeline facilities and start the process of calculating emissions for those compliance years and then assessing compliance obligations based on that.
Interesting, thank you. That's a huge amount of work that has to happen. And I appreciate everyone, I imagine, not in this room and not in this room working to make this so. I have a handful of questions, I think, related to that, and hopefully they're somewhat coherent. When you talk about rebaselining, can you expand on that a little bit in terms of, am I right in assuming that taking the COVID years as a baseline was not necessarily an accurate indicator, and that was what prompted that?
Great. Yeah. Thanks very much for the question. Yeah. So the processes of rebaselining is really just trying to allow facilities to have a baseline from which they can reduce their emissions intensity. And so the way our program works is when you register, we look at your facility emissions, we look at your production. We work with the facilities to understand kind of, what did the last 5 years look like? And we try to pick out 3 of the most representative years of those last 5 years to establish a baseline. And the beauty of our program is that facility can then start to make reductions based on that baseline versus some other programs that are based on average emissions intensity for an entire sector, for example. So in this case, the facility can just really look at their own operations, look for efficiency improvements, look for technology adoption to reduce those emissions, and the program really works really well that way. So COVID was a real challenge for us. You're absolutely right. I think you intimated that there was probably, in some cases there's swings in terms of significant reductions in production. So if you have a significant reduction in production, your emissions intensity overall, your emissions per unit of output goes up, right? And so it's really unfair for a facility because of an extenuating circumstance like COVID-19 to have to sort of endure that. And so it required us to work with those companies to understand what was the nature of them shutting down a facility or for a period of time. If there was COVID illness within the facility, what did that look like? And so we worked with a number of companies like that to reestablish those baselines for those companies. And there's a lot of facilities in our program. There's 150 individual facilities in our program, and within that 150 plus facilities, there's about 13,000 individual oil and gas facilities. Our program's pretty unique in that we've been able to aggregate all of our small oil and gas infrastructure with our program to provide carbon tax savings and sheltering for oil and gas in particularly the smaller companies. So it's a fair bit of work. Going forward, we're going to have to actually do a lot more rebaselining we're finding, and that's really because of changes that the federal government has made. So the federal government recently updated its federal benchmark for the period of 2023 to 2030, and included a new scope of emissions called flare emissions, particularly from the oil and gas sector, where methane is being burnt before it's being released into the atmosphere, because that's more environmentally friendly. And so because were asked us to add that program for the very first time, and we already were covering that program under the Ministry of Energy and Resources Methane Action Plan and their own methane regulations, we're going to need to make sure that oil and gas facilities are getting recognition for the emissions reductions that they've already made, and those emissions reductions are really significant in terms of the oil and gas sector. They've really met their targets well before the federal deadlines for meeting those targets, and to about 60%, which is more than the 45% that was required from the federal government. So we're going to have to probably rebaseline about 13,000 oil and gas facilities so that their baseline is more representative, and we can provide recognition for reductions they've already made to support a healthy environment in the oil and gas sector. So lots more rebaselining to do.
Thank you. It's really interesting, and I appreciate the work that's going on to, as you say, support a healthy environment and a healthy economy here in Saskatchewan. Can you help me understand a little bit more about some of the carbon tax sheltering that you referenced, specifically, I believe, for smaller oil and gas producers?
Yeah, thanks very, very much for the question. So for the oil and gas sector in particular, they have a sector-specific performance allocation. Another word for that is an emission reduction requirement. That emissions reduction requirement is to 2030. And for the oil and gas sector within our provincial output-based performance standards program, that performance standard is 20%. It is the highest performance standards of any sector. And that is in recognition that all the companies are emissions intensive, trade exposed, but we do a number of analyses to show the ability for each sector to reduce their emissions. And then we sort of prorate that depending on what's technically achievable for that sector. So it's 20% emissions reduction requirement in our program by 2030. And so effectively that, if you can think, you can kind of think of it as, well, if you're not in an OBPS program, you're paying 100% of the carbon price, the federal carbon price. In this case, they would be sheltered so that they would only be paying 20% of the carbon tax or of the carbon price, or sheltered 80% of the carbon price. That provides all of these facilities more time and runway to find emissions reductions, the lowest cost pathways for their emissions reduction requirements. There's a number of other programs that we have, like the technology fund that the minister mentioned, that they can pay into and they can benefit from by making an application to that technology fund to find new technologies, new innovations that will help reduce their emissions, and technologies and innovations that other companies within the sector or other sectors might be able to scale or replicate as well. So the program is really in recognition that because they're trade exposed, they can't pass their carbon price on to their customers, because their customers are in international markets, and most of those international markets that we trade in don't have carbon prices. So it's really a recognition that these companies need the time and space to reduce those emissions, and that allows them to do that, and it allows us to protect those industries. And it really does avoid carbon leakage as well. We don't want to see some of that production go to other jurisdictions and those emissions go up, because there's more lax environmental standards, which we see in a lot of cases. A lot of our competitors are frankly in Russia, China, Belarus, and we know that potash, uranium, and other production in a lot of these places is of a higher emissions intensity overall. So the more we see production in Saskatchewan, because there's only so much demand for these commodities, we're actually displacing some of that production in some of those other countries where we're seeing higher emissions. So that actually reduces overall emissions globally, and that's really the point of climate change. We know that climate change knows no boundaries, and the things that we're doing in Saskatchewan is really a great opportunity to address the global problem of climate change.
Thank you for that. In hearing what you've said about, obviously, like the trade exposure of some of our sectors, it twigs for me a conversation my colleague at MLA for Regina Rosemont had in estimates last month with the Minister of Agriculture, when they were discussing some of the opportunities and challenges that producers in the province have, and things that are of interest over there, like sequestering carbon in the land. And he talked about that obviously as the importance of native grass and things like that as carbon sinks, and as well as the critical role that the livestock sector plays in the maintenance of that. Essentially what I'm rambling on about is the role that that producers in the agricultural sector also plays in potentially sequestering carbon, as well as the impact that carbon pricing has on them. And I believe you put a question to the minister around, now that in certain places the government is taking control of the carbon price and collecting and administering it, what opportunities there are and how it relates to the agricultural sector. And the Minister for Agriculture, I believe, deferred to Ministry of Environment. So being totally out of my depth on this, as critic for neither, and certainly not a producer, farmer myself, I'm curious what opportunities there are for that sector with the work that you're doing here.
on to this. Where's my note? Yeah, thank you very much for the question. You know, as you well know, agriculture resonates right to the core of who I am. So I very much appreciate that question. And so I just want to create some context here. As far as agriculture goes, and as far as the fuel side of it, when we're talking carbon tax on fuel, so agriculture and producers will be exempt from that. Okay, so that's now we create a whole nother context as compared to what Aaron was sharing with you regarding industrial emitters and so on and so forth. That said, though, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that agriculture and producers continue to be subjected to the carbon tax indirectly, directly. Certainly through the pass-through costs of inputs, whether it be transportation, getting product on or off the farm, whether it be equipment that they're purchasing through manufacturing also is certainly something through fertilizer, something that we certainly know that our farmers use significant amounts of fertilizer to grow the crops that we grow. So certainly that is a concern. It's a continued concern. We continue to obviously lobby the government regarding the carbon tax side of it, but we don't need to get into that. I don't think right now. You certainly know where you know I guess my mind would be, and but I will point out that we have considered and we have been exploring the potential for offset credits for ag producers to recognize the good work that they're doing, good work that they've already done, and good work that they continue to do. As you know, we're leaders when it comes to sustainable agriculture practices, whether it be zero or low till, whether it be direct seeding, whether it be variable rate, whether it be cover cropping. We certainly are leaders in that, and we're always looking for opportunities to support our producers in benefiting from that. So we've explored how we can support producers in benefiting from their practices in the voluntary offset markets. Certainly some challenges with those markets, but we continue to look at alternatives and how we can certainly leverage what we do here. So I will just also point out something else. We are also supporting, when it comes to ag producers, supporting a bill that's working its way through the federal system, through Parliament, regarding grain drying and fuels used for grain drying, propane, natural gas. And so it looks like there's some promise there, but it's working its way through. So we've certainly lent our support in favor of that, but that's certainly where we're landing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Minister. And I you know, those concerns about the reality right now for producers are obviously shared concerns. And really interested to hear some of the potential work that's coming. I hear maybe coming along with offset credits or things like that for producers. And is understanding, obviously, this isn't related to the OBPS, but, you know, carbon taxes and emissions in general. Would the ministry be expecting like presentations from or proposals from other impacted ministries like Ministry of Agriculture, or would you be doing that consultation work with ag producers to really identify what those key opportunities are to ensure that you know, of course, we can recognize the really important work around emissions reductions that's already going on in the province?
So what I'd like to do is I'm just going to back it up to something I wanted to actually mention last time, and I just want to note, in addition to some of the work that we've done already, in investigating the possibility to benefit from carbon offsets, we have recently, and we've supported the Sustainable Sask initiative and the branding that's taken place there as a way to, lack of a better term, better market our products and share and tell our sustainable story to the world. So that's certainly an element and a component of what you've asked in your question. And even going back to what Aaron had referred to earlier, talking about carbon leakage, talking about the products that are out there, and that's really what's driving a lot of that Sustainable Sask initiative. Is the fact that when you compare our products, you certainly compare our agricultural products to our competitors. You'd be looking at canola at 64% less emissions intense when compared to our competitors. You'd look at wheat at 65% less emissions intense, all the way up to field peas, where it's 95% less emissions intense. So it's really critical that we share that story. So that's the other side of this. So I just want to point that out. But to that end, the Sustainable Growth Secretariat has certainly been driving lots of that work, and we certainly support and work with that Secretariat. But also, Secretariat has been doing work, I know, and I don't really want to speak too much for them as far as, I hate speaking for others, right? But as far as doing engagement and on all fronts. But I would like to actually, if I could, just actually pass it back to Aaron here for a second, just to also give you a bit of a context of where we've been regarding that offsets question, because we've traveled down that path and it got caught up in the mire. So I just want him to just maybe he can touch on that if you don't mind there, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The provincial government and through the Ministry of Environment, we were very interested in an offset system in Saskatchewan. We actually spent several years working towards one, including the Herculean task of actually developing the offset protocols, many of which can take upwards of a year to actually develop before they're in place and can be used in either regulated markets or non-regulated markets, the voluntary market, for example. So we had actually developed in 2021, 2022, a landfill gas protocol that we wanted to provide as an opportunity for offset project developers and some of our landfills to be able to access. We had aerobic composting, we had one for soil organic carbon, and then grasslands management protocol. And this was kind of our first foray into the offset space. We were going to make these available to our regulated emitters within the provincial output-based performance standard system, so they could buy credits probably at a slight discount, so it'd be worth their while. And then offset developers would be incentivized to continue to do offset projects, which would continue to reduce emissions or sequester emissions or avoid emissions. So we were really excited about the prospects. We actually engaged with more than 400 stakeholders on offsets. We held a number of webinars. We've been meeting off and on for several years with potential offset developers and regulated emitters that want to buy these credits as well. And that was going to be one of our major compliance options for regulated emitters within the Saskatchewan output-based performance standard systems. However, the federal government made a new change starting January 1, 2023 that said to have an offset credit within a provincial industrial emissions pricing program like the Saskatchewan OBPS, it has to follow all these extremely stringent rules. One of the main rules that needs to be followed is something called additionality. So this idea that it has to be more than business as usual. And then there's other issues like permanence. Some monitoring for something like 100 years. They have to be real verified in terms of their verification in international markets and systems. And what that did is it basically discounted all of those offset credits that we were looking at because they wouldn't have been eligible in the program. especially things like zero till, as the minister had mentioned. That was a big one for the federal government. The federal government continues to actually take credit in terms of national emissions reductions or sequestration from zero till, but they don't give credit for it through industrial emissions pricing programs like in Saskatchewan. And so that was something that we were very disappointed, and that caused us to have to remove offsets from our program because they wouldn't have been particularly helpful to us. And then there was some credits that we could have included in our program, but because of new federal rules where demand had to meet offsets, and because of also the rule that they had to trade at the marginal carbon price, it would have actually created a significant burden on industrial emitters in our program to offset those credits that may have been available. And that would have required us to ratchet up our performance standard allocations to levels that would have been technically unachievable for industry. And so it was because of these new rules, we had no choice but to abandon our offset program. There is the voluntary market. I've been talking about the regulatory market. There is the voluntary market. It's a market that is, fledgling for sure. It has its challenges. It's very hard to navigate for anybody. So, I think, there may be opportunities there just to look at how you might want to promote, Saskatchewan-based offset credits. We have some of the best land base anywhere in the world for offset development. You really need a large land base like in Saskatchewan to allow for sequestration. And so there is tremendous opportunity, but that market is it's still pretty much in its early days. There's issues around carbon accounting. There's issues around which offset credits are being allowed in which markets. And there's really a patchwork of markets out there. And the markets are these registries that are international, and they themselves have their own rules. So it's a very complex system to navigate, and we would have preferred a regulatory system, but the opportunity that may be available to offset developers, including agricultural producers, is in the voluntary market at this point.
What a shame those changes came in on January 1. Not only the lost opportunity for the province, but as well, I believe you used the words Herculean task and all the work that would have gone on. It's a real shame. So I appreciate that. That was kind of directly to the intent of my questions was understanding the opportunities that might be present in a Saskatchewan OBPS program for some of our other industries outside of kind of what one traditionally thinks of as industrial emitters. So. Yeah, thanks. You answered like 6 of my questions at once, so very appreciated. I guess looking at the OBPS currently for Saskatchewan, as it's moved, and the changes that have taken place in taking control from the federal government. I guess just to make sure, what I heard tonight is that emission quantification deadlines have effectively extended, and the quantification filings are backlog. Sounds like a negative word, but essentially like back to 2019 going forward, looking to, I believe you said December 2025. Is there any concern that companies will be able to potentially underreport emissions as a result of that?
Yeah, no, you know what? It's a good question. It's a complex process, obviously. So you're certainly asking, good questions they're good questions to gain understanding. So, just as far as the process goes, there is quite a process from day one. We were looking at the new regulations as far as for under the new federal requirements. Yes, beginning on January 1, but there is a process that takes place as far as data collection, data verification, and ultimately if there's a compliance owed. And so maybe I'll get Aaron, if you could just run through a bit of that timeline to just using maybe an example or that to shed a little bit more light on that.
Yeah. Thanks very much for the question. It's the process is really involved. We have a number of really talented emissions engineers that do this work for the province of Saskatchewan, and so it's not so much a delay. I think we're more or less caught up now because we've done the 2 compliance years, and we're going to kind of shorten the timelines for the emissions happening and then the eventual compliance, so if it's owed or credits generated potentially as well. That's the other part of our program. Industry can earn performance credits or carbon capture credits for having emissions below their permitted amount. But essentially what the process will look like going forward is the start of the year will happen. It'll be January 1st. The facilities will start to calculate their emissions throughout the year calculate the emissions from essentially the last year, essentially. So at January 1st, they're looking at their emissions from last year. They're calculating those emissions. They actually have to go out to a third-party validator. We require that in our program because we want to add that additional rigor and scrutiny in terms of those quantifications. And so we have very detailed quantification protocols that are based on certain ISO standards. They're internationally recognized, and we have very talented emissions engineers that do this work. But we first have a third-party validator that is accredited, validate what we call emissions returns for those companies once they've calculated their emissions. And it's quite a process to calculate those emissions. There's certain emissions factors that they have to use for different fuel types. They have to separate the different emissions depending on whether they're stationary combustion or other combustion, or maybe it's vehicles on the facility that are burning fossil fuels. So it's actually quite complicated. So the industry has to do a lot of work or consult to have that work done to be able to calculate accurately emissions based on our quantification protocols and standards. And then a third-party validator goes through all that and scrutinizes it and then validates it. And then that we will receive an emissions return in June. So they do all those calculations from January to June. We receive those emissions returns. We review them over the summer months, essentially, our team does. Quite a few emissions returns we receive, they all come at once. And then in September, we explain to them whether they've earned credits, how many credits they've earned, or whether they owe compliance. And so we send back to them that information in a letter, and then we give them a due date of December 31st, the following December, to make a compliance payment. So the process is actually, relatively speaking, pretty quick. It's about as quick as other emissions management programs, including the federal government. So we're pretty much matching the federal government in terms of our ability to turn these around. So I think we've mostly caught up.
Interesting though.
Sorry, if I could, so I just want to be really clear then. So the time frame that Aaron described and that you were asking about, I just want to stress that certainly not a delay. Part of the validation process. It just takes that amount of time, as he described, quite well, validation as opposed to a delay.
For sure, thank you. That was going to be my next question. I mean, I'm not by any means an expert, but my understanding is the feds have kind of like a single filing window and a massive bureaucracy able to support their processing, which I wouldn't anticipate that we have something comparable in scale or in scope here in Saskatchewan, but I'm hearing that the process is actually functioning quite efficiently. That's wonderful. Looking at the tech fund, I guess I'm unclear. I've tried. I'm the critic for energy and resources in SaskPower, so I've asked some questions in other opportunities. Is the tech fund up and running? Is there money in the tech fund? Is it accepting applications? I'm curious.
So the SAS Tech Fund, so that number that I'd read off to you before, and I'm going to go by memory here, $29,270,017, and I think it was 70 cents or something like that. Am I right on that one? Okay, I got it here in some sticky notes. That's the amount that has actually been accepted into the tech fund, so it's actually holding money right now. As far as the first intake of applications, and that may be also, so we're talking the intake of money, that we've got some sitting there. As far as the intake of applications, right now what we're doing is we're working through setting up our SAS review panel, which will be a panel made up of senior government officials, and so we're working on memorandums of understanding between ministries. Essentially, they would provide some recommendation as far as projects that would, be, I guess, recommended to move forward. So that's where we're at. We're looking at that probably it will be in the coming months, in the coming few months here. That's what we're looking at.
Okay, exciting. That's great to hear. So governance
Yeah.
and reporting, all that's in place and getting ready to start rolling. So then, again, forgive me, I'm kind of basing all of this off what's publicly available in the news and reports that are public facing. So when we go back and we look at the shift in responsibility around the OBPS as of January 1 this year, and, the Premier's talked publicly about, obviously, there's, can't remember the exact number, like $572, $580 million still sitting with the federal government. That's been collected in carbon tax. Would all of that money then move over to the tech fund? Is it the Ministry of Environment who then be responsible for the administration and distribution of that?
So prior to us putting forth our proposal to meet the updated federal benchmarks, electricity generation was under the federal OBPS program. So that number you're talking about, that 480 million, yeah, we're talking about the same number. I'm assuming. So that number, yes, that's by the federal government, but that will be, lack of a better term, Crown Investment Corporation is working, on a proposal to get that money back. So as far as that question, probably best struck to that minister in particular.
Sent it to you, so I'll ask him tomorrow.
Yeah, perfect.
And
Yes.
then if he sends me to you, I'm coming back next year. But so just to clarify, because in the discussion around that money, and I'm confident we're talking about the same pool of money, the tech fund and the province's OPPS system are discussed constantly in concert with that. So am I then to understand that should those funds, when those funds return from Ottawa to Saskatchewan, they're not going to be contributing to the tech fund?
Yeah, thank you. So as far as the negotiations and what the plan is, when those funds get that $480 million gets brought back, once again, I would certainly defer to the minister responsible on that one.
Okay, thank you for that. And again, I suspect this may be a question that then gets deferred to our favorite minister for CIC. But is there an accounting? And again, I ask because this question's been roundabouted to the Ministry of Environment. Is there an accounting of the dollars that SAS Power would have contributed so far since the province has essentially had their proposal accepted?
You know what, I'm going to just ask Aaron if you wouldn't mind, just maybe just outline this.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks very much for the question. So again, as the minister had mentioned, SAS Power is still regulated by the federal government. So it is absolutely true that the federal government, Saskatchewan did make a proposal, and that was notionally accepted by the federal government. But I think as we discussed a little bit here, we still have a fair bit of work to do to be able to show the federal government that we're standing up the necessary regulations and standards to enact that transfer of regulatory authority. Again, for SAS Power, electricity facilities, and Sask Energy natural gas transmission pipelines. So that's what we're working on right now. Until that happens, SAS Power still continues to collect the carbon price, and it continues to assume that it's paying those carbon tax proceeds and remitting those to the federal government. That'll happen. That has happened and will continue to happen all the way for all the years from 2019 to 2020. So what we're talking about is, okay, what happens if the federal government approves our regulations, stands its regulations down, and then that transfer of regulatory authority happens, retroactive January 1, 2023. At that particular point in time, obviously the 2023 has to pass for those emissions to be calculated. And then presuming that SAS Power is under the Saskatchewan output-based performance system, it would not owe compliance currently for that 2023 compliance year until end of calendar year 2025. So no decision, we've made no decisions about that. We're just focused on getting our regulations stood up. We have a technology fund that's a compliance option that at some point may be available to SAS Power. SAS Power will have options to buy performance credits or CCUS credits as well. We can't really speculate on what business decisions SAS Power will make, but job number one is get control of emissions pricing for electricity sector, including SAS Power. Ensure that that's retroactive January in 2023, and then again, those compliance payments wouldn't start flowing until December 31st, 2025.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more follow-up questions on this. So in terms of the work that's going on with the feds to ensure that this is more than notionally accepted, is that work that's undertaken by the Ministry of Environment, or is that elsewhere?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, no, that is our work in the ministry.
Okay, thank you. And then it was noted that Forgive me, I'm forgetting your last name, and I can just remember your first name is Aaron, but I don't want to be rude. Is it Worth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Director Worth, you referenced that SAS Power is assuming that they will be paying the carbon tax. Is SAS, and the reason I ask is my understanding was that there was an agreement as of January 1, 2023. So is SAS Power currently paying a carbon tax anywhere?
Yeah, thank you. So those questions are very specific to SAS Power and how SAS Power will be navigating that. So I would certainly defer, and I think they're best put to that minister.
Thanks, Minister. I appreciate that. And I do appreciate that, but I mean, right now there's emissions going out Boundary Dam 4, for example, at the stack. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is that going to pay under the federal or the provincial OBPS right now?
Once again, I would just say that until we've actually stood up those regulations and gone through, the federal government on that, I certainly wouldn't want to comment or suppose, for that matter.
Is the minister aware whether or not SAS Power is paying into the provincial OBPS right now?
So as it is right now, they owe any compliance to the federal government until our regs are stood up.
Thank you, Minister. I guess, last question from me on this, unless you say something wild in your answer. I guess, given the fact that obviously there's still a colossal amount of work to be done, and as I've noted, I think multiple times tonight, I really do appreciate the work that is going on to ensure that there is truly a Made in Saskatchewan plan to protect Saskatchewan industries and the environment here in our province, as well as nationally and around the world. But given the convolution, would the provincial government be keeping the OBPS if there was no federal backstop under a different federal government?
No, I can answer that one, I think quite handily here. Certainly, that's a huge hypothetical. So I obviously won't comment any further on that.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to take the opportunity to thank you, as well as my fellow committee members and all of your staff here working at the ministry across the province and watching at home, as well as the chair and committee staff. And I'm going to pass this over to my wonderfully capable colleague, the MLA for Saskatoon-Meewasin. And thanks, everyone. Have a great night. I really appreciate it.
I just want to thank the member for the respectful questions. Very much appreciated.
Is Mr. Teed.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me take some time here to ask a few questions in the place. Thank you to my colleague and asking a few questions in place of my colleague, Betty Napier-Albright, our critic for the environment. I just thought maybe I would start. I thought I would look at dive into some of the budget allocations here, but I wanted to start by asking, what vision have you brought as a minister into this role? What do you hope to achieve? I know you probably spoke a little bit about it in the preamble, but I was looking over some of the Hansard from last time, and you became the environment minister after Minister Kading. I'm wondering what you hope to achieve in this role.
Oh, goodness. It's an incredibly, it's a big file. It's an incredibly important file. It's an important file to the province. There's no question. Certainly, it's important on a number of fronts. Comments. I think I hit on it where we talk about the balance. Finding that and striking that balance. Certainly supporting economic growth, supporting the biodiversity and conservation that takes place in the province, and I really believe that those two do go very much hand in hand. So supporting that work that happens in the province.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump into the budget. What stakeholder groups were consulted in preparation for this budget?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and, I'll try to do my best. The list is extensive. I'll give you certainly a good sample of some of the folks that we would have engaged. I do want to point out that engagement, when you develop the budget, when we developed the budget, certainly didn't begin, on this day and then this day on a tight window. Engagement takes, over the course of the entire year. In developing the budget. So, certainly we've engaged with the Saskatchewan Mining Association, would have engaged with them, quite substantially. Our Solid Waste Management Committee, our Wildlife Advisory Committee, our Saskatchewan Trappers Association, our Saskatchewan Commission of Professional Outfitters. In development and working with our OBPS and setting up our OBPS program, we had over 150 individual meetings with stakeholders, looking at some of the caribou range planning that we've done. We met with numerous communities in the Athabasca Basin. That just hopefully that gives you a bit of a sample of some of the consultations that we've done.
Any specific stakeholders in climate or climate change?
Thanks. So once again, got a bit of a list here started for you. Certainly happy to provide more. Organizations like SUMA, certainly SARM. Already spoke about engagements around our OBPS. Habitat Advisory Committee. Certainly want to point out communities that are within the commercial forests in the province, Solid Waste Management Committee, U of R, U of S, for examples as well.
Thank you so much. Would you have an overall change in the Ministry of Environment's budget between the 22-23 to 23-24? And have a percentage on change on any allocation of funding? And is there an area where you've seen the largest increase in funding or the largest change in this budget allocation?
Sorry, I missed the first part. So are you asking for the change year over year, what our budget allocation
Yes.
is? Yeah. So it's a 2.9% increase.
Okay.
Okay.
Any areas of note where you've seen the largest change in the allocation, would you say?
Sure. I can give you a bit of a synopsis there.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just draw your attention to the Fish, Wildlife, and Lands branch. And so I'll just break that out into a couple of different areas there, the wildlife and then the lands branch or the lands program in particular. So overall, we're looking at a 9.2% increase in that envelope. But specifically for the lands program, it was a significant bump there at 39.5%. And largely due to our enhanced critical minerals strategy, some funding that's going towards there, looking at $300,000 for a consultation review process of our exploration permitting process, looking for efficiencies there. $200,000 for 2 additional FTEs in that particular branch to support environmental review due to consult obligations and the overall permitting process. There's also $225,000 increase for our additional 2 FTEs to support, once again, support the environmental review process and address any existing backlogs in that particular branch.
Speaking of FTEs, I noticed in Central Management and Services EN01 that there was a little bit of a decrease in this year's budget. Salary decreases under Executive Management, Central Services, as well as some decrease under the Climate Resilience. So have there been quite a bit of change in FTEs in the ministry over the last year, would you say?
Veronica Gellowitz, Deputy Minister. Thank you for that question. In Central Services, there have been some changes in our Deputy Minister's office. There's a reduction of an ADM position this year. And we had spoken earlier about the wind down of the small modular reactor unit. So that was a reduction of 5 FTEs. That program had end dated. Yeah. And so Minister spoke to some additional FTEs in the lands program as well. So those were the significant changes in FTEs for the ministry.
So with the wind down of the SMRs, does that then move into Sask Power jurisdiction? Would something like that purview move there, or once the project is done, you've done some of the environmental assessment? Is that kind of how it works?
So the program end dated in the Ministry of Environment. Crown Investments Corporation picked up responsibility under their energy security unit for small modular reactors, and so they staffed up. The staff didn't actually transfer. We didn't do a direct transfer of staff.
Perfect. Learned a little something today as I was reading through the Fish and Wildlife Lands section about, it responded to treaty land entitlement and specific land claims, and learned that the Ministry of the Environment takes care of Crown lands in the northern. My question around that is I was wondering if you had any numbers on how much Crown land has been sold in the last year through the Ministry of the Environment, and where does the revenue for that, where is that accounted for within this budget year?
So in 2022, there were 21 sales of lands that the Ministry of Environment oversees. Total hectares is 27.32 hectares. So just a little over 27 hectares of land was sold last year, bringing in $863,000.
Okay, thank you so much.
That fund, I'll just add, so those funds then would have gone into the Northern Municipal Trust, which is administered by Government Relations.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. One question as we look at fish and wildlife. In the last few years, the government's changed the rules for fishing when Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people fish together. My understanding is that under the new rules, as long as the non-rights holder has a license, both parties can fish together if folks are respecting catch limits. We were inquiring to know if there were any plans to look at a similar framework applied to hunting parties made up of mixed non- and Indigenous hunters.
What I'll do on this, I just want you to really understand both systems and kind of what we're looking at. We've got our expert here, Kevin Murphy here, so I'd certainly defer to him maybe to help me out on this one.
Thank you, sir. So as the minister indicated, I'm Kevin Murphy. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for our Resource Management Division of Environment. With regard to the question, you're correct. There have been some changes in how we allow parties to angle together. There had been some assumptions about licensed anglers being able to pass their catch to an Indigenous right-bearing person. And we've changed that now. So as long as all parties are respecting the catch limits, we allow them to angle together and to participate in that. That's an activity that we saw a lot of interplay and a number of people wanting to go out and angle together. With regards to hunting, a non-rights bearing person can accompany an Indigenous person to assist them with a hunt. We allow for that to occur as long as that individual is not bearing a license and hunting simultaneously. So they can accompany and assist. We've got circumstances where there are people who are relatives, as an example, who want to assist with the hunt. In terms of allowing Indigenous people to accompany licensed hunters, so far that practice is not allowed in terms of undertaking that work. Obviously, things evolve over time as society evolves, and if we received a number of concerns or requests for that kind of thing, we'd consider it. But at present, we haven't had very many people who want to participate in mixed hunting parties. It tends not to be something that we hear a lot about. Angling was definitely the case.
So, thank you so much. I'm going to jump into some of the highlights that came through with the preamble in the budget. It highlighted 3 areas where there was investment made: the Saskatchewan Mineral Exploration Tax Credit, money targeting supports for the mining industry, and dollars to improve geosciences. So I'll maybe start with the Saskatchewan Mineral Exploration Tax Credit. Can you give just a little background on this? And I was wondering if there is a price tag or how much this will cost to offer this tax credit.
Okay. You're certainly correct. I mean, these are targeted for the, exploration sector. They do fall under energy and resources. So that's, not environment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So likely all 3 of those kind
All
of
3 of them are.
environmental.
All 3 of those are energy and resources.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. I will pass that along. Then I will move on here. So on March 23rd, the Saskatchewan Finance Minister was asked in an interview about climate change and the environment budget, and she responded that it's sort of a global thing. She said, "I'm not sure that there's a single initiative that you would have that you can say this is climate change in every area. I think when you reduce the impact is how you affect climate change, and it's largely driven by industry, to be sure." So my first question is, what policies are being put in place through the Ministry of the Environment to ensure that any sort of guidelines are being put in place on industry from that, quote, largely industry driven?
So I guess to further what the finance minister had commented on before, yeah, you know, as far as our province's approach to addressing climate change, emissions reductions, certainly, you know, if someone's looking for a single budget line item to say the solution to, that certainly is not something, that's not our approach. Our approach is a one government, government-wide approach. Government-wide approach that is certainly outlined in Prairie Resilience, our climate change, our main Saskatchewan climate change strategy. And policies, specific policies and programs are available to certainly encourage the various sectors to continue the good work that they're doing right now, to further innovation. You know, you would find them in the various ministries. Certainly, you look at agriculture, you look at our sustainable ag practices. You look at when you compare our products to products elsewhere. Just given our practices, our zero-till, our variable rate practices, the use of precision ag, our you know, developing crop varieties, our methodology, our cover crops, you know, we're leaders in that area, and certainly our ag programs that support our producers to produce more is creating a solution to a global issue. As you and I both know, emissions know no borders. This is a global conversation, and so given that's a global conversation, Saskatchewan produces those sustainable products to be able to be the answer to that global question of climate change and emissions. Now, when you look at the products that we do produce, when you compare it to our competitors, emissions footprint on a bushel of canola will be 64% less than that of our competitors. When you look at wheat, it would be 65% less. When you look at field peas, it would be 95% less. When you consider what we sequester in our soils year in and year out, you know, we'd be pushing that 13 million tons of CO2 being sequestered each and every year, and not to mention all the grasslands and what our ranchers do in support of those grasslands and the carbon that's sequestered in those grasslands in the province. The number becomes astronomical. As far as energy and resources and the projects or the programs that they put forth, and you had mentioned some of those earlier on. But given how we mine and the products that we mine, you look at our critical mineral strategy, how key it is moving forward. You look at the uranium that's produced in this province, and programs that support the development of that mining, so critical to the global questions, the larger questions. You look at potash, meaning that food security, yes, but you look at our competitors and who we're competing with to provide that resource, you consider that we would be 50% less emissions intense to be able to produce that out of our province. So those programs certainly support what, you know, support what we are doing as a province. You look at our Crown Investment Corporation, you look at SaskPower. And what they're doing to make the grid, make electricity generation less emissions intense. You look at there's a recent announcement. This would be also something that they've committed to. SaskPower is committed to. And it's identified in Prairie Resilience when you look at electricity generation and having those targets of 2030, creating up to 50% renewables by 2030. You look at lowering the emissions footprint of our electricity by 50% by 2030. So those are very key. You look at the renewables that SaskPower has announced over the course of this past year, 700 megawatts to be added on. You look at what trade and export does. You look at our manufacturing sector. Yes, we produce the equipment that allows others to create products sustainably, but even how our manufacturing takes place right here in this province. You look at I guess going back, I look at our oil and gas sector. You look at the reductions that they've made. The federal government set some rather ambitious targets, between 40 and 45% methane reduction by the year 2025, and our sectors, our oil and gas sector, we're looking at 60% right now. And so that's certainly a great success story, what they were able to accomplish in such a short time. You look at government relations, what they're doing in relation to building codes, and the consideration of some updating some building codes as it relates to efficiencies. You look at SAS builds and what happens in our government-owned properties. You look at our forestry sector. Certainly, we have a hand in the forestry sector here as Ministry of Environment, but also does energy and resources in the forestry sector. It's a great success story, not only on an economic level when you look at northern Saskatchewan, but also on an environmental basis, just given the sustainable practices that take place. Each and every year we plan for, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, on this one, but we replant roughly 6.8 million trees to replenish our forests in Saskatchewan. Our operators through forest management agreements, they renew the forest that they harvest 100%. That's the expectation. And so we have a great story to tell, and I've talked so long I probably even forgot your question. But no, you know what, I certainly, that's the approach that we've taken. It's that right across government, it's all hands on deck.
No, that's a great answer. There's a lot of work being done across the government. Do you see a leadership role for the Ministry of the Environment on the climate file? A lot of different ministries are doing things, but where does that leadership come from within the government on the climate change file?
I would say that given the fact that that is our approach, the one government approach, we, right across government, we very much, as indicative of the programs and the successes that I've shared here, we all take a leadership role in that. I wouldn't suggest that necessarily there's one leader in the locker room. I'd argue there's a whole host of leaders in the locker room.
There's been some criticisms of this budget, especially around the environment, that the term climate change is only used once, and it's in relation to federal government policies. And then I look to the budget document and it says, the Ministry of Environment's role is to manage the health of the Saskatchewan environment, responsible matter that supports sustainable growth through objective, transparent, and informed decision-making and stewardship. Environment issues are increased concern. And in the environment, following that, environmental issues are of increased concern to Saskatchewan people. So I guess my question is do you, Minister, or does the ministry, agree that climate change is a real threat to our province that will have a significant financial impact on the province going forward?
If I could just clarity on that question. So when you referenced that there was only it was only referenced one time, that climate, like what? I guess what do you where are you referring to? What document are you referring to, or what are you referring to?
Preamble to the budget. The only reference to climate change is made in that climate change policies by the federal government are negatively impacting Saskatchewan's economy, which we absolutely know that federal government policies are absolutely affecting. But I think there from the angle that I'm looking at is, and I kind of spoke about it last week when we debated SMRs, is that there is a really important opportunity for our province to be addressing the climate crisis now, over the next 10 years before things like SMRs might be a reality. And so really, I guess what I'm looking for is climate change a real, are you seeing it as a crisis that the government needs to be addressing because it will be a financial impact, I guess, in other words?
Perfect. So as I indicated before, we've laid out our plan, our Main Saskatchewan climate change strategy in Prairie Resilience. So I just want to, I think you'll find this interesting. I just want to read just an excerpt from the introduction. Today we face a global challenge of climate change, and once again our province is motivated to develop effective response. Go on to speak of, it's up to us to come up with a Main Saskatchewan solution solutions that encourage action to meet the challenges posed by climate change. When faced with a complex problem, there's a temptation to reach for a simple, quick answer. Climate change is such a problem. And I guess that's where I would say Prairie Resilience is a across government answer. But beyond that, I'll just reiterate what I said before, and I promise I won't go over the whole list of things that we're doing. But I will say this, that once again, climate change is a global conversation. And I think the question we need to ask is part of that climate change conversation, is people need to ask, am I going to eat tomorrow? Is the world going to need more or less tomorrow? And, you know, when you look at the world population, you consider that the world is growing by approximately the size of Saskatchewan each and every week. And so the question then bears, is there going to be more people or less? Obviously, I've answered that. So if the answer is more, which we know it is, then what we need to ask is, and this is a critical question to the climate conversation, is where and what products are we consuming? And how are they produced? And so that's where I'll harken back to what we do as a province and sustainable products that we produce as a province. I see what we do as a province. We're the answer to the global conversation by supporting those industries that produce, what they do produce so sustainably.
Thank you so much. No, I really appreciate that. It really does answer my question. Maybe what I'll do is I'll move into some questions I had and some thoughts around extreme weather events that we've been seeing a lot recently. And we know that extreme weather events are happening at much more higher scale, caused by a changing climate, predicted to cost millions. So I'm wondering if there is anywhere you can point in this budget how the ministry is accounting for these increased costs. And I have some questions around different things like fire, tornadoes, increased, need for renewables. But maybe I'll start there. Is there a point in the budget where you can point to me where the ministry is looking at this and where they're investing to mitigate those climate emergencies?
Yeah, thank you very much. So just kind of did a little bit of a rundown of, once again, the one government approach. So when we look at some of the, and I was trying to make sure if I didn't hit something that you had brought up as far as something you wanted me to address, please just say, hey, you forgot this one. As far as crop and livestock insurance, obviously that falls under ag. Wildlife and wildfire and provincial disaster assistance program, that's SPSA. When you consider renewables, obviously Crown Investment Corporation. So that would be directed to them. As far as the invasive species framework, that might be of particular interest to you here. I'll maybe have Kevin actually outline that particular framework to you.
So while not entirely a factor in terms of invasive species or zoonotic disease, we know that climate change is an exacerbating factor. And the ministry is coordinating the invasive species framework, which includes work with, in particular, agriculture, but other ministries and crowns like Sask Power, to look at a comprehensive strategy to both detect and control invasive species on our landscape and to support everyone from individual landowners through to rural municipality governments in being able to react to invasive species as they come in. And in addition to that, we're looking at zoonotic disease and have a One Health Committee between the Ministries of Agriculture, Environment, and Health to be able to look at zoonotics. The most recent example of which I can think of is the bird flu coming through in the migratory birds, and having a capacity to link to our colleagues to be able to deal with that as it enters livestock, as we deal with it potentially crossing over to human beings, and working with both the federal government and internationally with the U.S. That's just one example of the kinds of things where providing that coordinating role and recognizing that exacerbation by some of the climate change factors is key in terms of us being able to respond to those things. So.
Is there a role in, I asked some questions to tourism when I was there about, we were really proud of the angling and hunting tourism that we have. And, so one of the concerns I had was overfishing and overhunting. But it sounds like alongside invasive species, is there a role that the Ministry of Environment plays in regulating hunting in that area?
I just asked, actually, Kevin, if you wouldn't mind just speaking to generally the framework that's used, both in terms of angling and in terms of setting some of those numbers and looking at our wildlife populations.
Certainly. So first of all, let me confirm for you that the Ministry of Environment is entirely responsible for setting the allocations for harvest of both game species and fish species for our licensed hunters. Those are people who are non-rights bearing. That's done within an overall policy framework that recognizes conservation, So if a species is endangered, or looking at its overall robust health and its ability to reproduce. The next on that is ensuring that our rights-bearing peoples have access to those resources. They're immediately after in the tier in terms of conservation first, then rights holders. After that, we consider the ability of our resident population to be able to access those resources. And then after that, non-residents, which is where the tourism piece comes in, whether they be outfitted or individually visiting the province and availing themselves of opportunities to angle or hunt that are made available to them. Fisheries and wildlife are managed with management plan. So there's a fisheries management plan that the government has, and a wildlife management plan, soon to be followed with a habitat management plan that will, if you will, create that third leg of a stool for us to be able to look at the entirety. Those plans set out general expectations and guidelines and entrench all of that policy that I spoke about. They were formed through full consultation, including with Indigenous peoples. And they speak to the process that we use to allocate the species for hunting, the process that we use to determine thresholds when a species might cross one of those boundaries, and we're suggesting that we need to limit the utilization of it. And then that sets out the mechanism whereby we have a yearly process that works through a number of stakeholders, be they groups like the Saskatchewan fly fishers from a fishery perspective, FSIN, the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation, all those players on our fisheries and wildlife advisory committees, input from RM councils. They sought on a yearly basis. They're part of those councils. Input from the Conservation Officer Service who are on the landscape, as well as data that comes in through our general surveys with hunters and anglers. All of that is put into not a black box, but a bit of a blender in terms of biological information. Our staff, obviously the biologists are appointed, use that to create recommendations for our minister in terms of setting the season limits, the bag limits, or the catch limits, and that goes into the production of our yearly guides for hunters, anglers, trappers, to be able to understand what our expectations are for the licensed community. One of the things that is growing in terms of participation and expectation will be more engagement with Indigenous peoples and looking at their harvest and ensuring that we're meeting those needs in a real way, both in terms of changing population, changing habitat, and exacerbating factors like climate change. We recognize that we need to be a little bit more nimble and able to actually advance some of the thinking in terms of regulating that. The minister this year is dealing with conditions where we've had a very harsh winter, which has caused some concentration of deer populations. And those concentrations often are looking for food supplies, which means that they're getting into crops, that they're getting into stored forage. And those kinds of problems are things that we have to deal with within that framework. And then lastly, I would say groups like the Saskatchewan Commission of Professional Outfitters work with the minister on that tourist level. So outfitters receive specific licenses and allocations to be able to ensure that they're harvesting within that limit framework, the expectations. So hopefully that paints a picture for you.
Yeah, and I'm going to go to one of the aspects of the answer about treaty rights holders, hunting and fishing. I appreciate that. Are there any dollars allocated in this budget that that will assist in ensuring that First Nations and Métis have access to those traditional hunting and fishing rights? I know some of the concerns is the loss of Crown land and the loss of areas to have traditional hunting and fishing. So I'm wondering if is there any specific policies that your ministry is looking at to ensure that First Nations and Métis folks can continue to access lands?
So I think the first place I should start is with regards to the disposition of any of the Crown resource lands that the minister is responsible for. All of those are subject to the duty to consult. And the primary tenets of the duty to consult and what we need to ensure that we have addressed, either from an avoidance or a mitigation perspective, are those rights of Indigenous peoples to maintain harvest off the landscape. So in every case where we make a disposition, we look at the permanency of that disposition, the level of impact it's going to have, both from a time scale but also a spatial scale, and work with the rights holders who traditionally use those territories and have identified that they've traditionally used those territories to ensure that we're mitigating those concerns and that we're able to address that from a strict dispositional perspective. We also are involved in programs like purchase of lands with the Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, lands which are specifically set aside as habitat for wild species and which are set aside to allow hunting and angling on those lands. Those lands are generally in the south of the province, although there are some in the north of the province as well. In addition to that, we are doing work, while there's no specific budget allocation, salary dollars are expended from our staff to do programs like managing the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan's harvest rights negotiation that we're undertaking with them to establish a harvest rights. We also undertake a number of engagements. Examples through our funding include things like working with the Athabasca region communities to discuss wildlife management values, so the very thing that we're talking about. We appropriated just last year roughly $20,000 to that programming, and we have expectations of conducting similar work through this coming year. Participation in the range planning process for woodland caribou management, where we fund individual community members, elders, groups like that to come in. Last year alone, we spent just about $7,000 on that, $6,710. Enabling elder participation in calving ground surveys with the Athabasca Dene Thuthine First Nation for the Beverly Carmignac Caribou Management Board, which is a barren ground caribou. That was $9,294 that we provided last year for that, and we will be continuing to participate on that co-management board and funding similar. I believe this month, mid-month 16th, I think it is, there is a meeting in Yellowknife. One of our staff is going, but they're also facilitating travel for several of the representatives from the communities to go to that. So assisting, that's Black Lake and Kamsel Portage to participate in that board. Last year we spent $8,938 to assist with their travel, and we'll probably spend something similar this year as well.
So much. Oh.
Sir, I would just add to that as well. We've got several standing committees. Also, I'd just like to highlight where First Nation and Métis representation have seat at those on those committees, and one would be as Kevin alluded to earlier, the Habitat Advisory Committee, the Fisheries Advisory Committee, and the Wildlife Advisory Committee. All have representation, First Nation and Métis.
Thank you so much. Would you be able to elaborate on the duty to consult process that your ministry follows when, as it relates to Crown land sales?
Yeah, so in regards to due to consult, our ministry very much closely follows the policy framework that's outlined by the government relations.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to come back to climate mitigation as it is with fire. I know lately we seem to be having two seasons in Canada, winter and fire seasons sometimes. You know, it's been a thing in the last couple of years. Is there any, and I know you had mentioned SPSA, is there anything in this budget in place to mitigate the threat of fires, both in the north and on the prairies?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So wildfire management, as I indicated before, wildfire management, mitigation, and prevention programs, that does lie with the SPSA. We've certainly indicated it and outlined through Prairie Resilience, but that lies with SPSA.
And flooding, would that be responsibility of the Ministry of Environment or move to?
Yeah, that, what you're referring to there, that's co-managed between the SPSA and WSA. So there's some work that's done around the predicting, and then the programming around obviously the mitigation and then the disaster assistance.
Disaster assistance, and so disaster assistance overall, and I'm thinking maybe lastly to tornadoes. Where does that fall? Is that in the Ministry of Environment or again?
Yeah, that's also SPSA.
SPSA.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds
That's PDAP.
good.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to, I guess, one question I had is, what is the ministry's role in assisting farmers in adjusting, you know, to things like sustainable agriculture due to climate change or becoming more resilient as we see a changing climate in Saskatchewan and just weather events? Does the ministry play a role in that?
Yeah, so, while agriculture, as I indicated in, at length earlier on, certainly engages in numerous practices that would be, be supporting sustainability and the good work that we do in our province. We have as far as Ministry of Environment, there's no regulatory function or oversight over on agriculture per se. That would be Ministry of Agriculture. That would work through, programming and the such.
Thank you. I'm going to dive into some questions that I probably kind of already know the answer to, but as you mentioned before, but I'm looking at clean water. Would that is like a clean water or ensuring access to clean water? Is that something under the ministry? Yes, or water. So.
So as far as water quality goes, and I think you said, I already know the answer. Probably you're suspecting I was going to say WSA, and a water security agency certainly would be the lead in regard to water quality. But we do have a role, though our ministry does have a role as far as the development of projects, and as projects, put proposals forth to ensure that, water quality is protected in the nature of those developments. And that's done through our environmental assessment permitting that takes place.
And so I guess maybe I'll quickly, environmental assessment. So when your ministry would be kind of responsible for like mineral exploration, oil and gas, and the environmental impact, is that maybe a true statement more so? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a robust process in place to certainly address developments that are proposals that are made in the province, and it's really critical that it's certainly critical that that it's in place as such. What I'll do is I'll maybe ask Wes, if you wouldn't mind, just maybe if you could just outline the process, our environmental assessment process, and and safeguards that are in place.
Sure. Wes Kotick, I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for our Environmental Protection Division. So regarding developments that move to considering if they're going to set up in the province, what we do through our environmental assessment process, they would apply to us and identify what they're planning to do, and in a project proposal, we would work with them to identify, what are the potential impacts that their project will have on the environment, and what are they going to do to mitigate those effects. So with our environmental assessment process, when we receive that proposal, we will circulate it to our review panel, which consists of experts across government, different ministries, depending if it's soil specialists or groundwater. Anything for, subsurface work would be energy and resources. And then housed within our own ministry, we have experts on, biologists and fisheries, and as well as scientists who would look at the different components of, say, setting up a mine or an industrial process. And through that there is also, we look to see if the duty to consult would be triggered. It would be dependent on, where is the site being located? Are there potential impacts to treaty or traditional rights? We would ensure that is involved. And there's also a public review component. So once the ministry is satisfied through our technical review process that the project has merit and we think that there's merit in it moving forward, we would move it to a public review process. And so that may happen in parallel with duty to consult if there are Indigenous communities that are involved, and then any general public, anybody could comment as well. And once that's all compiled, we will then look at all of if there are any concerns or if there's anything missing, and determine whether or not the project, whether or not we would recommend to the minister whether to approve the project. And quite often, there will be a number of commitments or permit conditions that we would consider need to be included in their operation before we would suggest that it be recommended for approval. And then at that point, it then moves to our permitting process, where we have staff in our environmental protection branch who develop the permits in collaboration with the proponents, and then we do compliance work to monitor that they're adhering to any of the conditions that are imposed in the permits, as well as any of the regulations or legislation that applies to that operation.
And do you ever see projects rejected, or are they then able to return if you say give some reasons why, are they able to come back and say, clear those reasons up with the ministry and move forward? Have there been projects, anything lately that you've seen that hasn't been moving forward?
Thank you for that question. So with our process, we feel it's quite a robust process. And during the environmental assessment period, there are a couple of areas where there may be iterations. So we would review if we find significant deficiencies or if there's significant public concerns. We would identify those to the proponent, but then we send them back, those comments back to the proponent and give them the opportunity to identify, okay, how are you going to address these concerns we've identified, or that these concerns that were maybe raised by an Indigenous community or the public, and then they can resubmit to us. And sometimes it goes a few times, so it depends on the project, and every iteration we may find less and less concerns, and then it's up to the company if how they want to address that and recommend how they're going to meet those requirements. But we do have certain standards, we won't go below those, so we need to ensure that the companies understand that, and we'll work with them to help them achieve that if those that are willing to do so.
Thank you so much. That answers my question for sure. I just had a few more questions. I think I have a few more minutes here. I wanted to jump back to the ministry's role in supporting energy transition to wind and solar, and if there's any dollars allocated in this budget, or again, if that moves off to Sask Power and Sask Energy.
Yeah, you have that correct. That would fall directly under CIC, right? Yeah.
Okay, and I'm imagining similar situation with supporting a transition to geothermal energy, or maybe is there any role that the ministry plays in approving projects that would be looking to build facilities, or, yeah.
Question. So for geothermal specifically, typically so far all the projects that have been identified, they haven't been on Crown land, so there's no surface lease requirements for us, and also the main, there aren't no standard environmental concerns. So typically the concern there, or the permitting authority, would be energy and resources, because it's mostly subsurface work that is entailed with geothermal. Regarding other energy transitions, so things like wind power, solar power, we have seen those projects. Those would typically, depending on the size, would come through for review to determine whether they're a development or not. So some of the wind projects have become developments, and so they would go through the formal environmental assessment process. Typically, if I recall, one of the solar projects has also met the development criteria, but it's because of capacity. So typically, the smaller ones wouldn't, and depending on the location, if it's private land or remote, they wouldn't be considered developments.
What does the development criteria lean to?
So there's 6 criteria in our Environmental Assessment Act that determine whether or not a project would be considered a development or not. So one of them is widespread public concern, significant use of a natural resource to prevent it from being used by others, a new technology. So if depending on what the technology is. If there are activities being proposed that aren't already covered in another regulation, those are 4 of the 6. And I think I mentioned widespread public concern. Yeah, if there is widespread public concern. Yeah, we'll have to follow up, or Brady might be
Yeah,
texting.
you know what, I'd be happy to follow up with those 6. I feel bad put Wes on the spot here. Yeah, he got a passing grade, but I can certainly follow up.
Yes, more than
with those.
50%. I appreciate, no, it just helps me understand. Again, here as filling in for the environment critic, so it just helps. I think I have a few more minutes here, so I had one question that I wanted to ask, and it was maybe back to hunting, and it was around if the ministry has any consideration being given to open up over-the-counter versus lottery draws for antlered mule deer tags, given that there's been an anecdotal kind of reports of increased mule deer populations.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn to Kevin, once again, just to talk about that. Certainly has got a wealth of expertise in this field.
Thank you, sir. So first, to start off, some sense of how we use the draw mechanism. Effectively, when we look at any game population, we look at whether or not it's meeting our base criteria, whether it's exceeding that, and there's opportunities for extra hunts, and then whether it's below that threshold and we actually need to reduce the number of tags. We use the draw typically as a way of allowing people in that, once it's exceeded that base level, and we're creating extra opportunity. Draw generally is for either populations that are smaller but more desirable to access. So if you think of moose in the south of the province or elk around Moose Mountain, where they're easier to access than going into the more difficult terrain around Fort Alicorn, things like that. So draw opportunities are very much a lottery that rewards the hunter with that easier, sometimes more specialty hunt. Antelope, I think, is the finest example of that, where there's not very many available. In the circumstance of mule deer in general across the province aren't exceeding that population threshold. However, we do want to use the draw and will be using the draw in a different way with mule deer. Mule deer have a very high percentage now, the highest of any of our ungulates, of chronic wasting disease, and there's a higher endemism of that in the southwest. If you think of sort of an area that would be perhaps roughly equivalent to the Palliser Triangle in Saskatchewan. Higher levels of disease there, lower populations. So we want to shift the hunting pressure to the periphery of that zone, almost a ring or a donut, a fence around that high endemism area, and increase the pressure. And one of the only mechanisms we have to change pressure through the zones is the draw. Over-the-counter tags, typically, unless we set it up that you have to go to local community to get them, they're not guaranteed by zone, they're just an overall availability. So we use the draw, but we have higher quotas for the mule deer in specific zones. So it's one of the reasons you see us continuing to use the draw, even though it's really not the same threshold that we would normally apply by policy. That's the reason for that with the mule deer populations.
Thank you so much.
Reached our agreed upon time, and seeing there are no more questions, we will proceed to vote on the estimates for the Ministry of Environment. But before we begin the voting process, Minister, if you have any closing remarks you'd like to make.
My only closing remark, I would just like to, thank the member for the questions. Certainly respectful questions. I'd like to thank the committee for sitting here into the late hours. I would certainly like to thank staff. Hansard, sorry, I'm hard to predict if my mic should be on or not, so thank you for your work there. I'd certainly also like to thank my officials. I'm blessed to work with an incredibly talented crew of people, and so I just want to thank them. And thank you.
If you have any comments you'd like to make.
So much. Yeah, I just want to echo those thank yous. Thank you for allowing me to pinch hit tonight on Ministry of the Environment estimates. I hope I made my colleague proud tonight. Thank you, Minister, for the answers. Thank you so much to your officials for coming out tonight. I certainly learned a lot. And I just want to thank the committee and the chair tonight. Staff, Hansard, thank you so much for being here into the, as you said, the wee hours of the night, it feels like. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We will move to vote on the estimates for the Ministry of Environment. Vote 26, Environment, page 45, Central Management Services, subvote EN01 in the amount of $14,287,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Climate Resilience, subvote EN06 in the amount of $4,964,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Fish, Wildlife and Land, subvote EN07 in the amount of $17,449,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Forest Service, subvote EN09 in the amount of $8,331,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Environmental Protection, subvote EN11 in the amount of $52,367,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Non-appropriate expense adjustment in the amount of $870,000. Non-appropriate expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. Environment, vote 26, $97,398,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for environment in the amount of $97,398,000. Mr. Francis so moves. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. We also have the duty of voting off the economy estimates this evening. Does the committee agree with voting off the remainder of the estimates? Yes. Carried. Minister, you and your officials are welcome to leave at this point in time. I don't think you have to stay for the next 6 pages. We will begin with vote 1, agriculture, page 29, central management and services, subvote AG01 in the amount of $13,414,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Industry Assistance Subvote AG03 in the amount of $4,451,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Land Management Subvote AG04 in the amount of $5,714,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Policy Trade and Value Added Subvote AG05 in the amount of $6,032,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Research and Technology Subvote AG06 in the amount of $38,178,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Regional Services Subvote AG07 in the amount of $33,741,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Program Subvote AG09 in the amount of $36,634,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Business Risk Management AG Subvote AG10 in the amount of $408,033,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustment in the amount of $2,283,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. Agriculture Vote 1, $546,197,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for agriculture in the amount of $546,197,000. Ms. Ross has moved. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Vote 16, Highways, page 73, Central Management and Services Subvote H101 in the amount of $17,305,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Preservation of Transportation System Subvote H104 in the amount of $127,554,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Transportation Planning and Policy Subvote H106 in the amount of $3,968,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Infrastructure and Equipment Capital Subvote H108 in the amount of $422,291,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Custom Work Activity Subvote H109 in the amount of $0. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Operation of Transportation System Subvote H110 in the amount of $178 million. HI 10 in the amount of $178,383,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Strategic Municipal Infrastructure Subvote HI 15 in the amount of $26,497,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustment in the amount of $270,996,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. Highways, vote 16, $775,998,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for highways in the amount of $775,998,000. Mr. Damodar so moves. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Vote 89, Immigration. Oops. Vote 89, Immigration and Career Training, page 79. Central Management and Services Subvote IC01 in the amount of $15,685,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Immigration, Employment and Career Development Subvote IC02 in the amount of $12,315,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Training and Employer Services Subvote IC03 in the amount of $5,141,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Labor Market Program subvote IC04 in the amount of $130,922,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriate expense adjustment in the amount of $1,620,000. Non-appropriate expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. Immigration and Career Training, vote 89, $162,063,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for immigration and career training in the amount of $164,063,000. Mr. Kirsch so moves. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Vote 84, Innovation Saskatchewan, page 83, Innovation Saskatchewan, subvote IS01 in the amount of $28,727,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Innovation Saskatchewan, vote 84, $28,727,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for Innovation Saskatchewan in the amount of $28,727,000. Mr. Cheveldayoff so moves. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Saskatchewan Research Council, page 105. Saskatchewan Research Council subvote SR01 in the amount of $40,408,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Saskatchewan Research Council vote 35, $40,408,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for Saskatchewan Research Council in the amount of $40,408,000. Mr. Damatar so moves. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Vote 90, Trade and Export Development, page 121, Central Management and Services subvote TE01 in the amount of $8,717,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Strategic Policy and Competitiveness subvote TE02 in the amount of $2,529,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Economic Development subvote TE03 in the amount of $9,920,000. Is that agreed? Carried. International Engagement subvote TE04 in the amount of $19,271,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriate expense adjustment in the amount of $96,000. Non-appropriate expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. Trade and Export Development, vote 90, $40,437,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for Trade and Export Development in the amount of $40,437,000. Ms. Alana, Ms. Ross, so moves. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. This one, right? Vote 87, Water Security Agency, page 125. Water Security Agency subvote WS01 in the amount of $103,030,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Water Security Agency, vote 87, $103,030,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for Water Security Agency in the amount of $103,030,000. Mr. Francis so moves. Is that agreed? Carried. Committee members, you have before you a draft of the 5th report of the Standing Committee on the Economy. We require a member to move the following motion, that the 5th report of the Standing Committee on the Economy be adopted and presented to the Assembly. Mr. Francis so moves. Is that agreed? Carried. That concludes our business for tonight. I would ask a member to move a motion of adjournment. Mr. Kirsch so moved. All agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned until the call of the chair. Thank you, everyone.